In this brief video, I want to provide just a short update on what's happening in the communities that we covered in the case studies in your textbook. In the Washington, D.C. region, over the last couple of years, we've seen continued growth in sectors of the economy that are not directly affected by federal procurement spending. This is a part of an ongoing trend that we talked about in the case where the region is trying to move away from its dependence on the federal government. Of course, Amazon HQ2 is still dominating much of the news here, though as of August of 2020, we're only talking about 1,500 jobs or so have been added in so far. What is a bigger piece of the regional economic picture dealing with Amazon and others is data centers. Amazon Web Services has something over 10,000 employees currently in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region. Other large players also have big data centers. As much as 70% of all the internet traffic in the world comes through Northern Virginia through servers located here. Microsoft just announced in early August that they were going to buy 300 acres of land in Loudoun County, one of the suburban counties, for expanding their data center operations. Now, they paid over $1 million per acre for that land, so obviously they see this as a huge investment. Other activities that we're seeing, of course, in this region on the Maryland side of the border has focused a lot on the response to COVID-19 pandemic. Johns Hopkins University is located in the southern Maryland suburbs, as well as several of the major pharmaceutical companies. So you're seeing a lot of dollars being poured into the investment and, of course, promises of manufacturing vaccine and therapeutics for COVID-19 as a part of our response to the current pandemic. We are also, though, seeing something really interesting that is emerging, and we don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. Anybody that tells you they know what the outcome of the shift in marketplaces, whether it's for the way we do retail sales or whether we abandon offices, tall office buildings, anybody that tells you they know what's going to happen is trying to sell you something at this point. We simply don't know. But there is concern about the degree to which this region has seen investments in major office buildings that are located near transit stations. So these are big, tall buildings, and some of them are underway, some have been recently completed. And so there is obviously concern in the commercial real estate market about what will happen there. From an economic development perspective, one of the biggest pieces of news since we wrote the chapter on the case studies has been an emerging level of cooperation, at least on the Virginia side of the region, where 7 of the local economic development groups have come together to look for joint initiatives to work on collaboratively. This is something that just hasn't occurred much in this region. And so we're very much encouraged by this. Now, certainly it would be better if it was a cross-regional effort that included the District of Columbia as well as the Maryland suburbs, but it is a beginning. Now, interestingly, and we will talk about this more in the semester, that cooperation is centered around talent attraction initiatives, not necessarily industrial recruitment. In Chattanooga, there has been both good news and then some not so good news since we wrote the chapter. Chattanooga has had a little bit of trouble in hanging on to headquarters locations. So in the industrial classification schemes that talk about headquarters type operations, there has been substantial job loss in the last couple of 3 years in Chattanooga in that sector. However, Chattanooga continues to add jobs, particularly in logistics, and more recently in financial services. So there is expansion happening there. The big news from an economic development perspective recently is that Volkswagen has just announced that they are going to expand their operations in the Chattanooga region. It's going to include a R&D facility that is specifically focused on technologies around electric vehicles, and that they are going to expand their auto assembly facilities to build Volkswagen electric vehicles in Chattanooga. In the long run, this is good because you're seeing this major shift happening among all of the auto manufacturers. GM has said that by the middle of the 2020s, that they are going to be all electric. Now, one of the things that's real interesting from a labor market perspective is that electric vehicles actually have fewer moving parts than a vehicle powered by an internal combustion engine. And therefore, it requires about a third less labor to actually assemble an electric vehicle. So one of the things that not only Chattanooga, with the host of the traditional manufacturing of Volkswagens, but others, Detroit, places in Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, where autos are being assembled in the traditional automotive realm, that they're going to have to get out ahead of some labor market intervention in the terms of retraining workers for the skills they need, specifically focused on electric vehicles, as well as perhaps, just lower opportunities in that industry sector for total number of jobs. In San Diego, job growth continues to be reasonable, but in the very important life sciences industry, I completed a study in May of 2020 where we were once again examining that industry, and we are finding indications now that while San Diego is still growing in that sector, they are losing ground to other areas of the country. So from a competitive sense, they still can compete for jobs, but they are losing out a little bit to areas that are not necessarily been their traditional competitors. So we examined where is that job growth really starting to accelerate in some of the life sciences sectors, and it's places in Ohio, it's places in Nevada, and some other states that just traditionally have not been big players in that sector. So we're going to be monitoring that carefully, as well as, of course, San Diego economic development practitioners will be looking at this very carefully about what it means for their region in the long term. Concordia, Kansas, the last case that we do, which is a rural community, just continues to struggle. It's that same story that we talked about in the case study where they continue to lose jobs. The only growth that they have had is in the hospitality sector and in government. Now, with growth in the hospitality sector, that would tell you that some of their economic development strategies may be working. As you might remember, that they have a good bit of tourism activity related around field hunting. So this is turkeys and quail and pheasant and deer to a lesser extent. So during the fall and winter seasons, you have influxes of tourists who are coming in to engage in these hunting activities. Now, of course, what we don't know is how the COVID-19 pandemic is going to affect that particular market segment. So it will be interesting to see if their business continues to be strong in that sector this coming year, in the fall of 2020 and the winter of 2021. Unfortunately, there is not a lot else going on in that economy, so that if the hunting business does get hammered pretty hard, there's not many other alternatives for going on. And so Concordia, like many rural farming communities, is still being challenged. And we're going to spend some time talking about that, both in the US context and in the Australian context of regional cities or regional towns in Australia that are in the heart of agricultural production areas.